Attack on Titan, one of the most talked about shows of the current generation. It's known for its plot twists, its obsessive fans, and its own handful of controversies. If you've watched anime, you almost definitely know about this show, and it's pretty likely you've heard about it even if you don't. But what makes it so unique, so special, and so gravitating? Is it worth the 79 or so episode commitment? Let's find out. But before we get into it, don't forget to subscribe. Over 50% of my viewers aren't subscribed, and at this point, even just 1 or 2 subscriptions could make a huge difference. It's free and there's really no downside to doing it. Anyway, honestly, I think this show is phenomenal. I don't think it has any weak points, from the production to the plot to the characters, animation, and especially the soundtrack. The Attack on Titan soundtrack stands out even among the best soundtracks. Last week I talked about how phenomenal the Hunter x Hunter soundtrack is, but this is phenomenal even compared to that. I think the thing that separates the Attack on Titan soundtrack from an average soundtrack is the fact that it feels like it was built specifically for this show. The soundtrack utilizes such a wide variety of instruments in conjunction with each other. In this soundtrack, you can find a choir, a drum set, and electronically generated music playing together. And they all work very well together, thanks to the steampunk-esque aesthetics of the show. Like, just take a listen to this small sample. I literally can't play a second more without the copyright gods coming down and smiting my channel, but you get the idea. The soundtrack really helps in creating tension in the plot. Not that it really needs to help. This story has so many twists you'd think it's like your small intestine or something. Every time you think you know what's going on and you think you have an idea of where this story is going to end, it throws something new for you to digest, adding on to the already immense amount of shit you have to think about. The plot twists are constant and almost impossible to predict, especially due to the amount of misdirection and just theoretical possibilities there are to keep track of in this show. In the short break between episodes, you're left to wonder what you just watched before being swept into the next gut-wrenching step in the adventure. Almost every single episode ends in a cliffhanger, so it will be very difficult to peel yourself off the couch in between episodes. Each of these episodes is, of course, driven by the characters. Unlike some anime where a slew of new characters are introduced every arc, Attack on Titan takes a different approach. Within the first season, a good amount of characters are introduced, and these are who we follow for the majority of the show. Unless they die. Despite the lack of new characters, the show never really feels stale thanks to how well written all of the characters are. The way almost every single character develops is immaculate. Oftentimes you can tell which events have a clear impact on the character, and some of these events will affect them for the rest of the series. Even the characters that don't develop as much are still very interesting, and in some cases extremely popular among the fanbase. I think one area that Attack on Titan does very well compared to other anime is their female characters. While they may not be quite on the same level as Jujutsu Kaisen or Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, they still serve more of a purpose than just being a love interest or for fan service. Most of them have their own individual motives or struggles, which even in this day and age is something that's not super common within anime. Now everything up to this point has basically been plot related, right? Well, I guess maybe not the soundtrack so much, but it's still somewhat related. The next highlight I want to talk about is the animation. The way Wit Studio does the flying sequences is amazing. I think it's one of the major draws to this series besides the soundtrack. The way that they play with perspective while the characters are in the air is something that's extremely hard to do and is done very, very well. Even the animation and the conversational sequences really helps bring the characters to life. Now, of course, both studios that animated Attack on Titan did use CGI at some points, but it really makes sense. The amount of effort it takes to animate Titans is immense. It takes a ton of manpower and a ton of time to animate even the simplest of sequences. And you can't even notice it for the most part. Of course, there are a couple of scenes that look a little bit wonky, but for the most part it's very high quality CGI. The last thing I want to talk about before we get into some of the controversies or issues of this show is representation. Compared to the standards of anime, Attack on Titan does a good job with representation as well. There are multiple queer characters and characters of color that are all instrumental to the plot. I think they're done fairly tastefully as well. They're not just caricatures of the people they're supposed to represent. Alright, that's enough lovey-dovey stuff. Let's get into some of the controversies. I think the biggest controversy that people think about when it comes to Attack on Titan is whether or not it's anti-Semitic. This would obviously be a very big deal if it's true, so I think it's something that's important to talk about. When you watch Attack on Titan, it becomes very clear why people make these accusations. There are themes and allusions to genocide and even the Holocaust in particular. However, it is not done in a way that is disrespectful to the victims. This is what the majority of the fans think as well, but of course, every time somebody talks about Attack on Titan, it's something that's generally brought up. It's definitely the biggest and most well-known controversy that needs to be talked about, but there are some smaller ones as well. Almost every other controversy was something that was started by the fans, and they're really not nearly as serious. In fact, I wouldn't even say they're serious at all. There was some controversy surrounding the change in studios after season 3, but it was mostly just people that were butthurt about the change in quality. I think it's blown really out of proportion and it's not a big deal at all. The last thing I want to talk about is actually the fans. I've mentioned them a couple of times so far, but they are an important part of the show. Attack on Titan fans in general are very toxic. While season 4 was airing, there were multiple times that fans would send death threats to animators via Twitter. And since the end of the manga in April, the fans have turned on each other and the whole fan base is devouring itself from the inside out. Everybody's opinionated and everybody thinks they're right. It's really the only drawback to watching this show if you want to talk to people about it afterwards. Because most of the time, somebody will tell you that your opinion is wrong and you're stupid. This isn't like a vocal minority kind of situation, it's like a good deal of people that are this toxic. Almost every platform that I've tried talking to people on, there's somebody ready to tear you down. Especially on Twitter and Reddit. If you can find a more niche section of the fanbase, I think you can have a really good time talking to some of the people. Just be careful about who you talk to for the sake of your own sanity. So do I still think Attack on Titan is worth watching? Definitely. Despite the controversies and the insane fanbase, I still think it's a phenomenal show and I think the vast majority of people will enjoy it. That's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching and don't forget to subscribe. Like I mentioned earlier, it really helps more than you know. Thank you and see you next time.